We are continuing to remove some of the paywalls and update some of the content for this, the second year of Phroneo. Please enjoy this post originally published here a year ago and share it with your friends and relations on why we write. At the end of one year and the beginning of the next, when it seems appropriate to look at the past and to think of the future, I came to the realization that it may be necessary to re-examine the very basis of writing in general and theological writing in particular. Why do people write? I imagine that it used to be the case that people wrote because they had something important to say. Historically speaking, not everyone could write. Of those that could, not everyone assumed that his contribution would be worth the bother. Even the greats like Plato did not always assume that, and it may be that he had to attribute his own ideas to Socrates, rather than presume that anyone would pay attention if he put his own name to them. It helped that Socrates never wrote anything himself. Nowadays, however, it is very difficult to know why people write. Some appear to write because they must, whether for a class assignment or for a conference in which they had been asked to participate, or because they hope to get paid for their labors, or for some other such reason. Others seem to think that what they have to say is very interesting, and they have a burning desire to share with the world. Alas, it almost never is. But what if all of these reasons suddenly disappeared? Would many of us still write? Even more importantly, do many of us actually have anything to say? Too often, much of modern theological writing seems to be a regurgitation of someone else's writing. To use an example from some of my own previous pieces, topics such as Desert Father N on the raising of children come to mind. First, the sheer absurdity of the topic does not seem to raise too many eyebrows these days. The professional cello player on the practical aspects of brain surgery. Why would anyone want to know what a cello player thinks about brain surgery or what a celibate hermit said about married life? Second, if anyone wants to know what some author thinks about any topic, would it not be best to read the works of that author? What exactly is the purpose of reading someone else's view on the view of someone else? I know, in partial fulfillment of the requirement for. Furthermore, nothing of significance or consequence is added to the sum of human knowledge when I express my views on someone else's views and prove my point by liberally citing the original text. Is it that I do not believe others to be capable of reading the text for themselves? Is it that I do not think that others can comprehend the text and thus require my predigesting and regurgitating it for their benefit? Is it not too presumptuous of me to tell other literate, educated, reasonable, and intelligent adults what some very famous author wrote on any given topic? Why not let them read the text and judge for themselves? Either way, the sum of knowledge remains unchanged when I merely repackage that which has been produced by another author. I know, in partial fulfillment of the requirement for. Of course, this is not to belittle the idea of the great conversation. However, the very culture of orthodoxy seems to stifle the said conversation to some degree. In philosophy, for example, even the greatest are not presumed to be speaking from divine revelation. They may be smart, even wise, but another philosopher may legitimately claim to be just as smart, or just as wise. The obstacle in the church is that we are the church of the fathers with a capital F, not of the fathers with a small f. It is often assumed that the fathers had a very special access to theological knowledge, whether through revelation from God or through the purity of their life, which allowed them to peer into the mysteries hidden from the rest of us. Because I cannot presume myself to be on the same level with the fathers, whether in conversing with God or in purity of life. That would be unorthodox, would it not? My thoughts and opinions cannot be part of their great conversation. They speak as ones having authority. The most I can do is learn what they taught and regurgitate what I learnt. To build on what they have already established, to add to what they have already said, to reinterpret and re-envision their thought would be too presumptuous and haughty and, again, unorthodox. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 29, there is an interesting mention about the manner in which Jesus taught. He taught them as one having authority, and not as their scribes. The scribes regurgitated what others had said before them, citing one prophet, referencing another. Prophets, on the other hand, did not pepper their speech with references to other prophets or to scribes. They spoke with authority. Thus saith the Lord. That is to say, I personally heard from God himself, and therefore I have something to share with all of you. Jesus, of course, had even more authority and often said, but I say to you. Using these principles in examining modern theological writing, it is painfully evident that most of us write as scribes, not as ones having authority. This is the key difference between us and the fathers of the church. The fathers conquered sins and passions, and then wrote about their experience of being victorious. We are burdened by sins and passions, and write about someone else's experience of being victorious. The fathers fasted, prayed, and kept vigil for decades, and then wrote from the rightful position of experts on this topic. We often forget that such luminaries as Basil the Great, John Chrysostom, and Gregory the Theologian were ascetics first, before they became theologians. We, on the other hand, complain about our weaknesses, make excuses, give ourselves dispensations, and then tell others about the benefits of fasting by citing someone else's examples, unable to refer to our own. In some disciplines, albeit not all, such a lack of personal expertise in the subject would be unacceptable. Imagine someone who does not know how to play the cello attempting to give cello lessons by citing Cello for Dummies, or someone who cannot swim teaching swimming after watching a few videos, or someone who has never built anything giving construction advice by invoking the names of famous architects. This would be absurd, and yet it does not seem to be absurd when the same is commonplace in Christianity. Do not tell me how Saint Mary of Egypt kept her fast. I prefer to read that on my own. Tell me how you keep your fast and what you have learnt from your personal experience. That would be most interesting. And yet, there is one valid reason to write about things one has not personally experienced. Writing is a good way to think. It allows for the process of thinking. It is necessary, however, to be honest about this kind of writing. First, just because one thinks, this does not mean that his thoughts are necessarily correct. Second, this type of writing must be directed at self, not others. If others happen to find the thoughts interesting and choose to join in the process of thinking together, this would be wonderful. But this type of writing must never presume or pretend to be any sort of teaching. It is necessary to think, and writing is not a bad format for this exercise, but this should never be confused with the writing as one having authority which only comes from personal practice and experience, or as a direct revelation from God Himself. And so it is that I best think by writing, yet having no authority, I direct my writing to self. If you happen to resonate with my thoughts to self and find them useful, please share Phroneo with your friends and relations. And if you would like to support this project, consider becoming a paying subscriber. It is still only $5 per month. Thank you.